Please join us in respect as Eric Trapito of the Zuni tribe embraces us with a cultural blessing.
Hello, from Zuni. I am Eric Trapito. I'll be delivering a blessing to you all in my native language. I hope you all are in good health and in good spirits. And with that, I'll begin. Kesi maluka yatonne ho yato katachi labate ona yam tesashina kui to yela ne kwai kena yaton kokshi yaton soya hoskagi kesi le anagapa yashok deus akya to now on onishan aganapka luka yatonne homa tachu homa tsita homa shashina we hom chawe homi yanikina we le hokton kashme kunde hoganapko hosyam dina shaki ko sto now ho deus benedidio shapa like ankonde Awan ona, yaneke, awan shashiake, awan gashima, awan toshanane, awan utenane, awan teakunane, awan saunikate makwintume, isken kwatem sheteni halo, willi tonaka ho ateakwa, kwashona tonte usutekoha, yanichiana pshikwa, ho nawan shetilon banina chawe, tawashiwan awan chawe, lishon tempi una pate, yamiuna yakan ateatuna nakia, Ketanishi on the one and Atekana, Ibiatume, Yaknasho, Yashu, Kokshi, Yanikine, Kokshi, Kwashon Lesna, Ketanishi on the one and Ate, Shukwa, Devana Letna, Homata, Chu, Homatita, Homa Shashinawe, Hom Chawe, Homi, Yanikinawe, Awan Ona, Yaneke, Awan Shashiaka, Awan Kashima, Awan Toshanane, Awan Utenane, Awan Deakunane. Awan saunikate makwintume isken kwatem teni halo wilitona kaho ate kwa kwashona tonketsanishi atene tumikena kesi tawna le na homata chu kwashon ansama usute kwa yani ate awna yatu. Thank you. Elakwa.
Wow, that was absolutely inspiring. Thank you, Eric. Thank you so much. And with that, I would like to welcome everyone to the 2021 Biomedical HIV Prevention Summit. I am your host, Ken Like Barbie, and for those of you who do not know that Ken Like Barbie is a thing, I am that thing. And lucky for you, you and this thing will be together for the next couple of days. And we're gonna delve into all the many flavors of biomedical prevention tools. Now, before we do that, I wanted to make sure that I thanked our sponsors. And we would like to acknowledge our partnership with the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Their generosity allows us to make sure that this information gets out to all of you that are making a difference in our communities. So speaking of you, I want to make sure I thanked all of you for working as hard as you have every day, even in a pandemic, that you continue the fight, that you haven't stopped to end this HIV/AIDS epidemic. Thank you. So let's talk a little bit about what's going on this year for the summit. You know, I think we've all become pros at the online conferencing thing, haven't we? You know, not even a pandemic can hold us down, can it? Can I get a witness? You know, in the past, the summit has provided a time of fellowship and shared knowledge from the leading minds in the fight against HIV/AIDS. This year ain't no different. We have brought together people from various target communities and staff responsible for the EHE implementation to speak with you. You know, they'll be here throughout the 40 plus workshops, the 4 plenary sessions, several community corners, and the exhibit hall presented to you during the summit. So it may all be virtual, but there's no lack of information. So let's get started with the first plenary. And the gag is, it's about everyone's favorite topic. We're talking about sex. So I know exactly why you're here. You heard that there was going to be a conversation about sex, and that was a party that you wanted to join. Well, listen, I don't blame you. Who doesn't like talking about sex just a little bit? But see, we can't talk about sex until we discuss PrEP, because PrEP has been changing the game since 2012. So although it hasn't been accessible to everyone who needs it most, you know, PrEP has certainly changed the way that we relate to sex and each other. So we are going to put some of our academically based and some of our community-based folk together to talk about sex, because what we want to hear are their perceptions and thoughts on how PrEP has impacted pleasure, impacted intimacy, communication, and sexual behavior. Juicy, right? I'm going to be watching right alongside you guys, and I'll let Alex handle this part of the conversation. You'll meet him in a second, but before we jump into bed, we're going to ask Dr. David Pantalone, professor of psychology at the University of Massachusetts in Boston, to set the mood. So David will be sharing some of his findings from his research, especially from a new recent article published, The Impact of Pre-Exposure Prophylaxis on Sexual Communication and Sexual Behavior of Urban Gay and Bisexual Men. What a title, right? Well, he'll also be talking about some other research on PrEP and HIV that is relevant for gay and bisexual men of color. David, I'm gonna find me a comfy spot, but this stage, it belongs to you.
Hi, thanks so much for inviting me. It's an honor to be able to present with you all. I wish we were together in person so that we could keep these conversations going, but COVID, of course. My career has been focused basically full-time in HIV prevention and HIV treatment since my first job after college 20 years ago. And back then I was doing counseling and testing for a study with gay and bisexual men. I knew that we were working hard, and I know that lots of HIV infections were prevented because of the work of people in those roles, but it just didn't feel like enough. There's this quote that I really like from Laurie Garrett, this really excellent science writer. I'm kind of paraphrasing, that the virus would continually find people all over the world because the human factors responsible for the spread of the virus would resist change. And I just remember hearing that for the first time and thinking, well, damn, you sure are right about that. It's a little bit of a downer. I know this is supposed to be a plenary about gay sex, and I haven't even talked about gay sex yet, just my early midlife crisis. But then there was PrEP, and just like ARVs were a game changer on the treatment side in the mid-90s, PrEP has been a game changer on the prevention side. And over the last decade, because of PrEP, there's been so much good news in HIV prevention. The epi data show that rates of new infections are down, and especially in the populations where PrEP use has gone up. For a lot of researchers, we had been wondering, first just in conversations with ourselves, but then more recently in terms of our published work, kind of so what? The infections are down, but what else? We know PrEP prevents new infections, but what else has it done? And a few colleagues and I thought, let's see. Christian Grove from CUNY Public Health and Ian Holloway at UCLA and a bunch of my grad students, we analyzed 100 interviews with PrEP-taking gay and bisexual men for an NIH-funded study that Christian was doing. And we specifically were asking how folks responded to these questions. How has PrEP changed sex? Not just in terms of condom use, but psychologically, emotionally. How is sex different for them? How has PrEP changed how they talk with their sex partners about HIV or about negotiating condom use? And how has PrEP changed their perceptions about having sex with HIV-positive partners? I would say that the results are really striking. Working on this project was one of those times when it felt like we were doing the right research at the right time. This is not always true. So what did we find? A whole bunch of interesting things. And in my opinion, you should drop everything and read our paper right now, maybe after the summit, actually. Because there's so much nuance to what the men reported that I won't really be doing it justice here. So good news about gay sex. I'll just focus on 2 points that I think are really relevant for the panel discussion that comes next. And the first is that the men talked about the post-PrEP era as a revelation for them, a revolution, as sexual beings, including changes in community norms, positive and negative, but ways that their behavior is different and ways that they see other people's behavior is different too. They talked about how palpable it felt that their HIV risk was down, and not just because they're taking PrEP, but because so many men were taking PrEP too. They talked about how the gay community, such as it is, was different, felt different. They called taking PrEP empowering. There are all these really inspiring quotes about how they didn't even realize how much anxiety they had about sex or how strongly they had these connections in their minds between sex and death. It was really, really inspiring to hear how different sex was for them in the context of PrEP. They talked too about how they could finally admit that they really wanted to have sex without condoms, that they preferred sex without condoms, and they could finally have that kind of sex without all the guilt and shame about the risk. And setting aside whatever their preferences about condom use, they also talked about how PrEP made them feel so much more comfortable having sex with HIV-positive partners. And in reading those interviews, it really gave us chills. The men talked about being more comfortable, being more willing to have sex with HIV positive men. And so many of them expressed appreciation for that reduction in fear about acquiring HIV and that greater sense of connection that PrEP gave them. I keep seeing this term come up in the literature, that PrEP is one of the main ways that it's changing how positive and negative men interact, that PrEP is bridging the sero divide and bringing people together finally without all the fear and the shame and the ways that that was a barrier for them to intimacy and connection. And my colleagues and I, we had a hunch about some of these sentiments, but we were really blown away by how strongly and how clearly the men articulated it. And thinking about this study and the other work like this that's happening now, it's such a big change from the frustration and the powerlessness that I remember feeling when I first started working in HIV prevention. And I'm really excited to see what comes next. Thanks for inviting me, and I hope you all enjoy the summit.
So that's not the foreplay I had in mind, but it was worth it. Oh, so y'all thought I was playing? No, I plan on watching this one. See, Alex Garner's from the Gay Sexuality and Social Policy Initiative at UCLA Luskin. And so Alex will be moderating this complex and thought-provoking conversation while me and my popcorn is gonna be on this side. So Alex, the stage belongs to you.
Hello everyone, it's a pleasure to be here. I'm Alex Garner of the Gay Sexuality and Social Policy Initiative at UCLA Luskin. Thanks to all of you for joining us. We have a terrific panel for you all, and before we start, I'm going to ask each panelist to introduce themselves. Let's begin with Brandon.
Hi everyone, my name is Brandon Harrison, Senior Project Manager at the Primary Care Development Corporation and a Gay Men of Color Fellowship participant at NMAC. I want to thank you all for joining us today and thank NMAC for having me.
Jose?
Hey everyone, my name is Jose. I'm a second-year law student at the University of Colorado in Boulder. I'm also a fellow along with Brandon and NMAC's Gay Men of Color Fellowship.
And Lucas.
Hello everybody, my name is Lucas. My pronouns are he, him, and they, them. I work over at Children's Hospital Los Angeles in the Center for Trans Youth, and I myself identify as a trans man of color.
Excellent. And once again, I'm Alex Garner, and I'll be moderating this discussion today. So PrEP has been around for nearly 10 years, and we know that it's highly effective at preventing HIV. It's common for us to discuss various aspects of PrEP, science, risks, access, yet we rarely have the opportunity to talk about PrEP and sex, particularly around gay and bisexual men of color. Well, that is exactly what we're going to do today. Today's discussion is centered around the sexuality of gay, bisexual, and queer men of color, and it's commendable that NMAC has chosen to prioritize this critical conversation. Gay sex is valuable. It's an important part of our lives. As gay men, we form social bonds around sex, we cultivate community, and it's fundamental to our mental health. The birth control pill was about preventing pregnancy, but it was also about so much more in women's lives. Much like the pill, gay men's lives and sexuality has been transformed thanks to PrEP. For gay men of color, our sexualities and our bodies have been devalued, criminalized, and pathologized. It's still a radical political act for queer men of color to choose to use our bodies to pursue pleasure and intimacy. So when it comes to PrEP, we ask all sorts of scientific questions, but to start, I want to know how PrEP has helped you have the sex that you enjoy. Brandon, let's begin with you.
Sure, thanks Alex for that question. But are we allowed to say sex?
Absolutely.
No, I'm just kidding. So if I could start, I'd like to share the World Health Organization definition on sexual health, which it kind of has helped me kind of center how I feel about PrEP and how I feel about sex in general. And so they say that sexual health is a state of physical, emotional, mental, and social well-being in relation to sexuality. It's not merely the absence of disease, dysfunction, or infirmity, but sexual health requires a positive and respectful approach to sexuality and our sexual relations, as well as the possibility of having pleasurable, which I think is the real issue, and safe sexual experiences free of coercion, discrimination, and violence. And so, I mean, there's more to that, but I mean, I think any and all of these things can be compromised when there's fear embedded and associated with your sexual life. And for as long as I can remember, prior to starting prior to starting PrEP in 2013, all I felt was fear and anxiety and shame associated with the sex and my sexuality that I was, or the sex that I was having in my sexuality. And until recently, I think that, you know, messaging around sex and HIV prevention has been all fear tactics. They've kind of created these barriers, both physical and symbolic, between folks that are living with HIV and then their HIV negative partners and the connections that we thought we could have prior to that. And so PrEP has not only, you know, help promote, you know, sexual relationships, but it's connected me to healthcare. It's allowed me to break through these barriers that I felt were there before with my sexual partners. And then finally, it's allowed me to take charge of like my sexual life and enjoy the sex that I want to have without the feelings of anxiety and shame surrounding my sex and sexuality, which could often be increased when you enjoy sex or the intimacy with your partners of a different status.
Absolutely. Thanks so much. And so one of the goals of PrEP obviously is to prevent HIV and as we work in gay men's health, we think about prioritizing health and sexual health. But I think the other question becomes, when do we prioritize sexual liberation? So Jose and Lucas, how has PrEP had an impact on your sense of sexual liberation?
I think for myself in general, as you know, as coming back as a trans masculine person, it's been more of taking charge of my sexual health. Whereas before I was more of like, I had doctors telling me what was best for me, but kind of taking PrEP gave me that initiative to kind of explore what I like and what I want and also feel safe doing it. Especially because I partner with a lot of trans women who are higher at risk for HIV. And we often exclude the trans masculine community because we don't think that we partner with people who are at risk for HIV because of our body parts that we have. So taking PrEP was one step on that forefront to feel safer about who I partner with, but then also taking charge of my sexual health in general.
Well, that's such an important point in terms of understanding the ability to determine what one wants to do with their own body. And Lucas, you make such an important and valid point that we need to remember as we discuss this. Jose, how has it impacted you in terms of the sense of sexual liberation?
So I'll be honest in saying that, you know, Brandon, you talked about fear, anxiety, and shame. And I have been on PrEP now for over 6 years. I still struggle with fear, anxiety, and shame in sex. Like PrEP has not ended that for me. What PrEP has allowed me to do is maybe be a little more rational about the sex that I'm engaging in. And so I really love bareback sex, and I don't enjoy condoms at all. And PrEP allows me to have safer condomless sex, and that has been a big part of my sort of sexual journey, is getting to the point where I can be open about the fact that I like bareback sex, and even in spaces like at NMAC and different sort of HIV advocacy, sex positive spaces, it's still difficult to be upfront about like the fact that I like to play around with different fantasies on condomless sex. So PrEP allows me to sort of do that and be less fearful, but the fear is definitely still there.
So Jose, that's such an important point, and I'm so happy that you brought it up immediately in this discussion about PrEP and sex, because it ultimately comes down to whether or not gay men are choosing to have sex without condoms, right. And whether or not we as a community and we as people working around HIV can acknowledge that there is value in sex without condoms, that it means something to gay men who choose to participate in it. And so PrEP provides the opportunity to choose to do that. And I think one of the ways that it compares for people living with HIV, I know for me, one of the things that I felt liberated after finding out that I was positive was that I didn't have to worry about wanting to speak openly about sex without condoms and experience any sort of stigma around that. Of course, it still exists and we see it all over the place, but I think one of the things that was a great opportunity around the development of PrEP and the whole movement, such as the Truvada whore movement, is that it embraced the issues associated with slut shaming, and it used that movement to really shine a light on those sort of issues. Do you all feel like PrEP provides an opportunity for us to speak more openly around stigma, and in particular stigma associated with sex without condoms?
I mean, I definitely think that it opens up that conversation to have with partners about, HIV status, what you feel comfortable doing and stuff. I know sometimes, especially with new partners, when I do disclose that I'm on PrEP, they feel that it's easier to do bareback stuff, whereas I may choose not to, just because, this is the first person I don't really know. And we often forget just because someone's on PrEP doesn't mean we can't contract STIs. And that's a big thing where it's like, I want to have that freedom to choose who I have condomless sex with, or who I want to enjoy this kind of thing with. And I think but it does create that conversation where we start talking about, okay, you might think we're safe because I'm on PrEP, but these are a few things that you might not know about being on PrEP, kind of thing. So I see. Yeah.
Brandon, what has been your experience around this?
Yeah, so I mean, I think similar to Lucas is, is sometimes the assumption that you, just because you're on PrEP, that you are going to have condomless sex with that person. And so I think that it really allows for people that are, that you have sex with that are not on PrEP, or that are living with HIV, or that, just usually use condoms or just have condomless sex. Like, it allows you to use that point as some education piece, and to like highlight the fact that, you still can negotiate how you're going to have sex. Like, there's still safer sex practices that you still have to negotiate, especially like if it's a new partner or if it's a hookup. But I definitely think that there's still stigma associated with it. I think that people on PrEP are still stigmatized, just like women who were taking birth control was, that you just want to have all of this sex. But I also think that you brought up Truvada whore, and I think that, the community reclaiming that as their own thing has allowed people to open doors to have conversations about sexual norms and practices. And like, now we're even at a place where we can talk about chemsex, which was so taboo before, but because we have PrEP added, people are able to enjoy all of the sex that they want to have. And yes, there's still stigma, but I think that we're, breaking down those bricks slowly with, the conversations around PrEP, and then, bringing in U equals U, which I know we'll talk about at some point, but like bringing in all of these things I think are helping with fighting stigma.
Well, so STDs are sort of incidental to gay sex, right?
Yeah.
They're one of the things that we have to navigate when we have sex with each other. And you can get STIs through oral sex, and things can be transmitted even if you're wearing a condom, such as syphilis. So we also have to sort of alter our relationship to STIs so that they're not seen as something that's stigmatized or bad. I think that part of the challenge around PrEP and STIs is that much of the conversation is actually reinforce the slut shaming and stigma around PrEP, because it's created this community of people that say, oh no, I'm still a good person, I still follow the rules, I still do what I'm supposed to do, as opposed to the ones who say, I'm gonna do whatever I want and deal with the consequences. And I think part of that also means that we have to learn to destigmatize STIs. So if you have syphilis, you have gonorrhea, it's just an infection that can be treated easily. But we also have to work on our relationship to those sorts of issues. And so, Jose, you were talking about sort of struggling with still being upfront about these sort of issues and speaking openly about it. How do you think STI conversations complicate that or provide an opportunity for you?
Conversations around STIs continue to be difficult because, I think that STIs, even though they're different from HIV, in my experience, people connect the two. And so if I tell somebody I have gonorrhea or I got syphilis, then they're thinking that I'm possibly going to contract HIV, or they're thinking that it's just very negative. And so, those two, people just really connect them. And I'm not, even though we can say that they're different, it just feels that it's not as relaxed as maybe it should be if we understand that these things are treatable and that most of us will get them throughout our lifetime.
Well, and maybe the question we should be asking isn't are you having safe sex, or are you having sex that's healthy, quote unquote, but are you having sex that you enjoy? Are you having the sex that you want to have? Are you having sex that brings you pleasure? Can you all answer those questions? Are you having the sex that you want? Are you having the sex that you enjoy?
I think being on PrEP has given me that freedom to create boundaries and explore what I enjoy, and kind of tell, especially with new partners, I'm like, this is what I want and that's it, kind of thing. Setting those boundaries and saying, like, if you don't want that, okay, that's fine. It's not going to work out, kind of thing. And being brutally honest about it. I think it's been more of, it's created that, it's given me that ego boost to kind of be like, hey, this is what I like. Anything outside of this, I don't, kind of thing.
So it's empowered you to be able to communicate more openly about what your sexual desires are, right?
Yes, definitely. It's giving me that empowerment boost. Whereas before I was tiptoeing around the issue, and having PrEP and not having to worry about one less thing to worry about kind of gave me that opportunity to learn more about myself, and kind of, even being on PrEP, it kind of taught me, like, coming into the doctor's every 3 months to get checked up. Whereas that probably wasn't the issue before. I wasn't getting tested every 3 months. I was getting tested every 6 months or so on. So it kind of gave me that charge of that sexual health.
Well, so it's interesting because we're talking about sex and PrEP, yet we still drift back almost instinctually to talking about health and seeing the doctor, and what our sexual health is. How do we make up for that? How do we make sure that when we're having a conversation about sex, that we're talking about sexual pleasure, we're talking about working through the issues or the boundaries that exist in our mind or culturally around sex, such as Jose mentioned? How do we work to do that so that we have the sex that we enjoy, and it's not just eclipsed by safe sex and prevention messages? Jose?
I mean, I think, I grew up in Phoenix, and I grew up undocumented, and I'm like Latino, I'm from Mexico. And so growing up, I didn't have a lot of people in my life who could talk to me about sex. And I would go on chat lines and websites and Craigslist, just kind of looking for sex. And I think when I was introduced to sex that way, there was always sort of STIs, and HIV was always presented very negatively as things I needed to stay away from. And so I came into my sexuality really scared of everything. And so even having conversations around sex, they are informed by stigma and fear and a trepidation, to be honest. And so I think what I'm understanding now, as I'm 28, is that sex for me is I have a relationship with sex, not with, and share with other people, but like sex for me is something that is going to be a part of my life forever. And I hope that as I grow older, it becomes more dynamic and interesting and sexier and hotter. And PrEP has allowed me to sort of bring that into when I think about sex, like when I'm not on a panel and I'm thinking about sex, I'm not thinking about like these kinds of like sexual health. I'm thinking about like, I really want to take a couple loads tonight or something like that is what I'm thinking, very honestly. And I think I'm able to do that maybe because of PrEP. So it's like, how do we bring that sort of real, honest, cognitive things that we do with sex into the spaces that they need to be a part of, which is these kinds of panels, our doctors. It's hard, right? There's just so many people and institutions who inform.
I appreciate the fact that you bring that up. I appreciate the fact that you're able to speak so openly about it, because we need to bring that into our conversation. We need to make it part of the narrative. And so far, the narrative has simply been around access to PrEP and being good and taking your medicine every single day. But talking about barebacking or taking a load is seen as something scandalous or too adult. When the reality is that part of us really getting our arms around the issue of PrEP and what it means, particularly for queer people of color, is our ability to embrace our sexuality. And that means speaking openly about these issues that bring us pleasure and fulfillment. And if that is sex without a condom, if that's exchanging fluids and semen, whatever, then that means we have to be able to prioritize that conversation. And if we don't, then the stigma will endure. So how do you think what are some effective ways that we can do that? I mean, I think besides Jose, speaking openly about it now, are there other ways that we can be as explicit and honest about the sex that we want to have so that we can move this conversation forward?
I mean, beyond our panel and beyond this space, I think that I think we have to employ providers and people that are going to be touch points for people that are going to access HIV medications or PrEP. Like the providers themselves have to be trained and culturally responsive to the needs of some of their patients. And I think that, that it has to, because that's where you're going to go and you're going to feel that shame or you're going to feel that stigma there. But I also think that we have to have more messages similar to what Chicago did, transmit love, or things like that, things that really put a positive spin on what sex is and take away these fear messages. And I think, sorry, go ahead.
No, so my question is sex about love? Or is sex about—
I mean, not necessarily. So that was just, and so they have transmit heat, transmit whatever. You can transmit fluids, whatever you want to give to another person in terms of sex. But I think I was using it as an example of ways that we've turned around the messaging. But no, sex absolutely doesn't have to be about love.
And what about in terms of, so those are institutions, right? Those are
right.
Marketing campaigns, those are HIV organizations. But there's also this whole world that we live in, whether it's social media, whether it's social networking apps. How might we change sort of our positions and messaging as individuals there to really give voice to some of these issues that we speak about that we think are important? Jose?
I'm sort of thinking that, so I think that I have a lot of privilege because I do get to, in some sense, be open about the sex that I'm having and that I want to have, and it's still something that I try to work on. But I kind of think that it now we need to sort of people who feel comfortable about being open about their sex need to be almost even more brave and sharing it with their friends and maybe not family, but on social media and things. So that's kind of how we do the culture shift.
Yeah, so I mean, we don't see, it's such an important tool to be able to utilize conversations with friends and in social spaces to have these topics brought up, and everyone always sort of changes their attitude changes the minute someone's willing to broach the topic of sex in an honest and explicit way. So I think that's one simple tool that we can suggest to everyone who's watching. And I want to thank all of you for contributing for this part of the conversation. We're going to take a quick break, but I hope you will continue with all of these exciting topics. And we have a very important message, so stick around.
Hi, my name is Lauren Miller. I'm the Health Equity Coordinator here at NMAC. Our program, the Youth Initiative, works by helping youth between the ages of 18 to 24 learn more about the HIV workforce. We know that joblessness is a real problem in society today, especially for our LGBT youth. So this allows them an opportunity to really get those professional skills needed that will take them to the next level. The youth initiative helps end the epidemic because when people are more informed, they're able to make better choices. And we know that education is something that is twofold. I teach you something and you're going to teach someone else. So it's about really getting that message out within community. So equipping them with those skills to be able to empower each other and be ambassadors amongst their own peers, that's where the real magic happens. To find out more about the Youth Initiative and other programs that NMAC offers, you can go to our website, nmac.org, and you can follow us on Instagram.
El programa de Bloque en Español es diseñado para la comunidad Latinx en Estados Unidos, específicamente para las personas que viven con VIH, y es un programa de capacitación que está dentro del Centro para Acabar la Epidemia de VIH, y el programa básicamente se enfoca en educar a personas para que participen en los programas de Ryan White y en otros equipos que planean, organizaciones que planean con ellos, asociados, y equipar a las personas que viven con VIH, las cuales su primer idioma es el español, a también poder participar y ser parte de hacer decisiones que les afectan individualmente, pero también a sus comunidades. Entonces, de ahí es que viene el liderazgo. Otra idea muy importante es de que la misión de NMAC es el liderazgo basado en la equidad racial. Entonces, este programa realmente demuestra el interés de NMAC y su liderazgo en incluir a todos, no solamente a las personas que hablan en inglés, pero también que hablan otros idiomas como español, y esperamos en el futuro poder ofrecerlos en muchos más idiomas. Y la meta principal del programa, el enfoque, es en desarrollar todas estas habilidades relacionadas al liderazgo. Entonces, enseñamos módulos como, por ejemplo, para analizar data, simples como calcular el porcentaje, calcular el promedio, calcular tasas, y así las personas cuando participan en estas reuniones se sienten un poquito más cómodas participando en las conversaciones, sobre todo en las ciudades en las cuales son muy bilingües esas reuniones. Entonces siempre pueden o participar en español o sentirse un poco más cómodas entendiendo en inglés o preguntando por un intérprete también. Entonces la idea principal es de que los participantes se eduquen sobre cómo participar mejor y contribuir a estas reuniones para su propia salud, mejorar su propia salud y la salud de su comunidad. Y a los que están interesados en participar en este programa pueden suscribirse a nuestros emails mensuales en nuestra newsletter, y la página para registrarse es nmac.org por sus siglas en inglés, y pueden ahí recibir diferentes updates a las próximas fechas que tenemos. Para este año vamos a estar pronto en Puerto Rico, en la ciudad de Houston, Texas, más o menos en el verano. Entonces estamos muy emocionados de ver cómo el programa es aceptado por la comunidad latina y cómo podemos seguir mejorándolo.
The HIV 50 plus cohort of people is the first group of people aging with HIV, right? We never had the experience to either provide services or medical care to people that were over 50 and living with HIV. This is the new group that is coming. The program that our division work on is the HIV 50 plus strong and healthy program. That program attends the needs of people with HIV over the age of 50. Basically, we started the program in 2016. After I attended a think tank about aging and HIV, we realized that this community was not getting the attention that they needed. And also they were becoming the largest group of people living with HIV. It's important for us to understand that when you're aging with HIV, even though you may show some similarities in the way that HIV negative people age, the fact that you have been, most of your life living with HIV, having viral replication in your reservoir constantly, that create inflammation constantly, and that may unusually damage tissues in the organs. So people that are HIV positive, they start seeing comorbidities that normally happen in the 60s and 70s, they're starting to see them in the 40s and 50s, or they face like 2 or 3 comorbidities at the same time. That's why we did the program. That's why we did an need assessment, to understand where we had to start in order to identify those needs, because we didn't know, right? So we have to take care of those aging, their comorbidities, in order for us to make sure that they stay undetectable, healthy, and that, will absolutely take us as one component of ending the epidemic. You can find information on NMAC website. If you go to our treatment division webpage, we have information about the HIV 50+ program. We have information about when we give scholarships to be part of the group. So just go to the website.
I'm Allison McKeithen, the Conferences Manager at NMAC, and my work primarily focuses on our 2 national conferences, the Biomedical HIV Prevention Summit and the United States Conference on HIV/AIDS. The United States Conference on HIV/AIDS, affectionately known as USCHA, has been produced for over 30 years, and it's our flagship conference where we offer a diverse array of education, from HIV prevention to lifestyle care, ensuring that our attendees get the best, robust education possible to go out there and end the HIV epidemic. We are here to ensure that you are recharged and refreshed and retooled to go back out there and end the HIV epidemic. So visit us at uscha.life, that's uscha.life, and get more information. The Biomedical HIV Prevention Summit is the only conference that primarily focuses on biomedical interventions around HIV prevention. Since its inception in 2016, the summit has given the most diverse education around research, biomedical interventions, and everything that's coming up next regarding how to protect yourself and prevent HIV. Follow us at #2021BHPS or visit our website. We've come so far, we still have a ways to go. We are going to end the HIV epidemic, and we're going to do it by leading with race.
Hello, I am Jason Zhu, U equals U ambassador, also known as Undetectable Man. And so what does U equals U mean as a movement for men who have sex with men? Personally, for me, since I've discovered U equals U, it has really become a beacon of hope in my life. I feel like I'm able to just be my true self and be truly authentic and really be comfortable with sharing my story. Now, what does U equals U mean? Well, the first U is undetectable, and the second U equals untransmittable. So that means if you are a person living with HIV and you achieve an undetectable viral load, you cannot pass HIV on to your sexual partners. And that's just the science. It's been proven by 4 major studies, and is also accepted, around the world. What that also does is that it really encourages people to be empowered, to own their HIV status, that being a person living with HIV, and really understanding that, I no longer have to hide anymore. And that's really what this message and this movement is about, is empowering people to break stigma so they can free themselves. It's been proven by the science. There is 0 risk. 0. And so U equals U is just one tool in your little toolbox in having safer sex. So you can choose to use a condom or you can choose not. But once again, it is a tool that you can use in having safer sex. The U equals U campaign is in 102 countries and is in over 1,000 partner organizations. U equals U has improved the mental, physical, sexual, and reproductive health of people living with HIV. U equals U has created this whole rationale for access to HIV treatment. It has also helped with freeing the stigma, the internal stigma, that people that are living with HIV are dirty, a danger, or disease. Changing the narrative so that people who are living with HIV can live a freer and happier life. So U equals U needs to be the foundation. It needs to be everywhere. Everyone needs to know about U equals U. Providers must share the information with their constituents or their clients and let them know what U equals U is about. Organizations, they should share the message of U equals U and free people of stigma and shame. What's next for prevention access? We'll continue to break barriers and spread the word of U equals U. And we'll create spaces for people that are undetectable. People who are living with HIV to become undetectable. People who are detectable to be empowered, to one day have hope to become undetectable. U equals U is my life. And it's yours too.
Welcome back. You all are familiar with U equals U and the work they're doing, right? So undetectable is a key part of prevention, yet the ability to achieve an undetectable viral load is still a privilege when many people living with HIV still struggle with complex issues like poverty, homelessness, incarceration, and stigma, particularly among communities of color. And there are still too few voices of gay men of color represented in the U equals U movement. We all share the goal to end stigma, and as we work to fight stigma, we must be mindful that we don't perpetuate stigma associated with living with HIV among those who still have a detectable viral load. There's still a great deal of work to do, and there's no question that undetectable has had a profound impact on the sexual relationship between negative and positive gay men. So how have these advancements in prevention helped you navigate this viral divide? Brandon, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so again, I kind of go back to between work and Brandon having sex. But I think one of the things that, in my mind, I try to look at HIV with a status neutral approach, as, that's was created out of New York, where, everyone has to take an HIV test. Everyone has an HIV status. We all are either going to, use a condom, take medication to either prevent or achieve viral suppression. And when all of those things happen, there's the HIV divide kind of ends there. But I think in terms of, you mentioned Black people or people of color being able to achieve viral suppression, and we definitely have a lot of work to do in that. And I think that one of the ways that we have to do that is, as Jose said earlier, like use the social media spaces where Black people that are undetectable can be the face of it, because so far, many of the faces have been non-Black people. And so, and Alex, thank you earlier for sharing, but, in other spaces, there's been a lot of, non-people of color talking about being undetectable. So I think that, we have to continue to work on making sure that we're removing barriers to care for people that are unable to achieve viral suppression because of their circumstances.
Well, and people who have detectable viral loads still have sexualities, right? Yeah. They still have a right to have sex that they enjoy and have sex with other people and not be stigmatized. And so as we talk about the need for access to care and representation, sex is still an integral part of that. And so the ability to pursue a fulfilling sexuality is equally important and should be prioritized as all of these other issues. I am lucky enough to be undetectable. It's been 25 years. And I know that early on, I almost exclusively had sex with positive guys. And PrEP and undetectable really changed all of that, because now I found myself having sex with negative guys and guys who I normally would never have had sex with. And largely that was due because I didn't want to use condoms, and they wanted to use condoms. And then PrEP and undetectable changed that. And so all of a sudden, a whole new group and community of negative men I was able to interact with. And that really changed significantly just my interactions with the larger community. Jose or Lucas, have you had or noticed a change in terms of your interactions between both positive and negative men, thanks to PrEP?
I
Yeah,
think.
so go ahead, Lucas.
Okay. I think since I started PrEP, I've been more open about having sex with people who are positive, just because I feel a little bit better. But even before that, U equals U was, I didn't understand what that meant. I was lost when that, came out. And it wasn't until I started PrEP and I started taking charge of the sexual health and kind of working within the community to kind of, take charge of what it meant and kind of getting rid of that stigma that I had with people who were positive, and bypass that and having conversations with people who are positive as well and getting their viewpoint on what they're feeling and how they felt about being stigmatized, kind of. So it kind of opened up conversations between them, because some especially some of my partners who happen to be trans women who are positive were scared to tell me they were positive because they've had so many negative reactions from people they've dated or people they've slept with or they've almost slept with, I believe, of that. Even with U equals U, people don't understand, people don't often, they just see the positive and that's it, kind of thing. So it's interesting because then I get to talk to them about it and they feel better because not only do I understand what U equals U means, but I'm also on PrEP, taking kind of charge of my sexual health in that sense as well.
And Jose, what were you going to add?
For me, there's been a big emotional component to understanding, to sort of ridding stigma. And just like PrEP wasn't a magic pill for me to feel like I was no longer ashamed about the sex that I'm having, PrEP has not been a magic pill for me to like immediately feel less stigma on HIV. It has been something that I have to continually work on. Is, I'm fighting against so many institutional forces that have made me fear HIV. And so whenever I am talking on Grindr with somebody who's undetectable, there's still something in me that's kind of just like, there's like a trepidation there, right? And I think it was like 3 years after I started taking PrEP that I actually felt comfortable having bareback sex with somebody who's undetectable. But that took 3 years of like conscious, like talking to friends and people who were like, no, girl, like, just like you go to see a doctor every 3 months because you're on PrEP, people who are undetectable are more likely to know where they're at with STIs and everything because they go to the doctor. And that's a generalization, but that sort of understanding for me was really important. And so we have to be really, or I have to be really brave and really courageous and look at the science and constantly work on resisting all of the fear that I've been fed.
Well, and it's such an important thing to sort of allow ourselves to understand, feel more understanding of ourselves in the sense that fear is not rational, right? So you can understand all the science of undetectable, but still have an irrational reaction to sex with someone who's undetectable. And, for me, being positive, I was negative at some point in my life. I still understand what it means to live in a world and be scared of HIV. And so I try to be as understanding as possible and clear about what I want, but fear is not rational and it takes time, and often a long time and work to get through it to the point that we can still feel comfortable. And PrEP has helped be a tool to help work through some of that fear in terms of sex between negative and positive guys. And I can say there were plenty of negative guys that I probably never would have had sex with prior to undetectable or PrEP that I had a really great time with. And I was lucky to be able to enjoy that time with them. and make some possible relationships or connections. So do you feel that communicating about those sorts of things have improved or changed now that we have PrEP, especially now that we can use online ways to connect with one another? Brandon?
Sure. I mean, I think it's great that most of the apps have included a way for you to identify your health status and whether, you can discuss it, you can list it, you can do whatever you want to do. So I think that definitely has helped people kind of decide how, how they want to move forward with people. And it's not that, and I think that takes away that when you get there in the moment. But back in the days when there was no health status, you get there in the moment and then you have to have that discussion. I think when it's listed there on the profile, it either, opens up the door to say, hey, let's discuss what type of sex we're going to have, or, oh, I see you're on PrEP, or I see you're undetectable, or I see you're living with HIV. Like, let's talk more about that. So I definitely think that it's made a way for people to have conversations, especially the apps that have allowed you to list it.
So we're just about approaching the end of our time, and I want to thank you once again. But before we wrap things up, I would love to hear if you all, each of you, have some key things that you'd like other queer, bi, gay, men of color to take away from this conversation about PrEP and sex. Let's start with you, Lucas.
I guess for me, it's more like I didn't think that PrEP was. I was told so many times by providers PrEP wasn't for me, even though I was having sex with people who are, HIV positive or or at high risk for HIV. And I think having that conversation with a provider as a trans man, is a conversation that transmasculine people shouldn't be afraid to have, and should take charge, of their health, kind of that sense. And, I've heard so many times no from providers about PrEP, that it felt good to have, be able to take charge of that and start Truvada in my end in general.
Brandon, what's some last tips?
Sure. So I would say just two bits. PrEP is safe and effective. There's the medical mistrust part that we left out about men of color. And so acknowledging that it's safe, it's effective, it's been on the market for nearly 10 years. And the second thing is we have the tools and we have the resources to take charge of our sexual health and enjoy the type of sex that we want to have. So those are my two bits.
And Jose, what points would you want to make sure that others know about sex and PrEP?
So about sex, sex is incredibly powerful in our lives. It's not just something we do at night or in secret. For me, sex has been a huge component of my identity. And so I encourage us all to respect sex for just the power that it has in our lives. And I think that for me, a part of respecting the sex that I have is being on PrEP, because I know that kind of what I'm doing requires me to protect myself, right? And to be on PrEP. So I guess the takeaway that I've been thinking about is sex is it's huge. It's a huge part of our lives. And I just said that, but it's just, that cannot be overstated. We really need to respect sex for how it's been a big part of our gay experience.
Well, Jose, I couldn't agree with you more. I think that's a perfect way to end this conversation, because sex is incredibly valuable and it's so important in so many different ways in our lives. Yet in the past 40 years, the conversations around sex really have fallen by the wayside. And we certainly haven't prioritized sex, particularly gay queer sex, in a way that advances the narrative, in a way that helps us pursue pleasure and intimacy, in a way that affirms our willingness to speak openly about our sexual desires, even if they're seen as controversial. So I think all of you, each of you, really have helped advance that today with this conversation. NMAC and this conference certainly have helped to do that. I would like to think of this as one of many conversations in the start of this conversation. And so I want to thank you all again for being so honest and so open with us. This really has been a memorable and incredible session. I want to thanks everyone at home for watching, and I hope you'll find this engaging and continue these conversations and go out there and talk about sex, have sex, pursue pleasure, and never ever be ashamed of your sex. So let's keep these conversations going. Thanks again.
Thank you. Thank you, Alex. Thank you, Jose. Thank you, Brandon. Thank you, Lucas. And of course, David. And I want to thank all of you for joining. The exhibit hall begins at 1 p.m., so go visit our sponsors, and bye-bye for now.